Hello. Now we're here to discuss the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA. The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, commonly referred to as RCRA, is our nation's primary law governing the disposal of solid and hazardous waste. Congress passed RCRA on October 21, 1976, to address the increasing problems the nation faced of municipal and industrial waste. The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act gives EPA the authority to control hazardous waste from the cradle to grave. This includes the generation, transportation, treatment, storage, and disposal of hazardous waste. RCRA also sets forth a framework for the management of non-hazardous solid waste. The 1986 amendments to RCRA enabled EPA to address environmental problems that could result from underground tanks storing petroleum and other hazardous substances. HSWA, the Federal Hazardous and Solid Waste Amendments, are the 1984 amendments to RCRA that focus on the waste minimization and phasing out landfill disposal of hazardous waste, as well as corrective actions for the releases. Some of the other mandates of this law includes increased enforcement authority for EPA, more stringent hazardous waste management standards, and a comprehensive underground storage tank program. The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act governs the management of hazardous waste. There is not a single comprehensive list of hazardous waste that is continuously updated, as hazardous waste identification is a process that involves many steps. To be considered a hazardous waste, a material first must be classified as a solid waste. EPA defines solid waste as garbage, refuse, sludge, or other discarded materials. If waste is considered a solid waste, it must then be determined if it is hazardous waste. Wastes are defined as hazardous by EPA if they are specifically named on one of four lists of hazardous waste located in Subpart D of Part 261, or if they exhibit one of four characteristics located in Subpart C of Part 261. Listed waste. Wastes are listed as hazardous because they are known to be harmful to human health and the environment when not managed properly, regardless of their concentrations. EPA has studied and listed as hazardous hundreds of specific industrial waste streams. These wastes are described or listed on four different lists that are found in the regulations at Part 261, Subpart D. These four lists are the F list. The F list designates as hazardous particular waste from certain common industrial or manufacturing processes. Because the processes producing these wastes can occur in different sectors of industry, the F-listed wastes are known as waste from non-specific sources. The F-list is codified in the regulations at 40 CFR 261.31. The K-list. The K-list designates as hazardous particularly waste streams from specific industries. K-lists are known as waste from specific sources. The K-list is found at 40 CFR 261.32. The P-list and the U-list discarded commercial chemical products. These two lists are similar in that both list pure or commercial grade formulations of certain specific unused chemicals as hazardous. Both the P-list and U-list are codified in 40 CFR 261.33. A, P, or U waste code may be applicable provided that the material is an unused commercial chemical product. A CCP is a substance that consists of the commercial pure grade of the chemical, any technical grades of the chemical, and all formulations in which the chemical is a sole active ingredient. Characteristic waste. Even if the waste streams does not meet any of the four listings explained, it may still be considered a hazardous waste if it exhibits a characteristic. In Part 261, Subpart C, EPA has designated the following four characteristics: ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, and toxicity. Ignitability. Ignitable waste creates fire under certain conditions or are spontaneously combustible or have a flash point less than 60 degrees Celsius or 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The characteristic of ignitability is found at 40 CFR 261.21. Corrosivity. Corrosive wastes are acids or bases, pH less than or equal to 2 or greater than or equal to 12.5, that are capable of corroding metal containers such as storage tanks, drums, and barrels. The characteristic of corrosivity is found at 40 CFR 261.22. Reactivity. Reactive wastes are unstable under normal conditions. They can cause explosions, toxic fumes, gases, or vapors when mixed with water. The characteristics of reactivity is found at 40 CFR 261.23. Toxicity. Toxic wastes are harmful or fatal when ingested or absorbed. When toxic wastes are disposed of on land, contaminated liquid may drain from the waste and pollute groundwater. Toxicity is defined through a laboratory procedure called the toxicity characteristic leaching procedure. The toxicity characteristics is found at 40 CFR 261.24. Generators are responsible for characterizing their waste and must determine whether a waste exhibits a characteristic by either testing or applying knowledge of the hazardous waste characteristics of the waste. In addition to federal RCRA hazardous waste identification rules, we have outlined most states are authorized to operate their own hazardous waste programs and may have more stringent rules than those of the Federal Hazardous Waste Management Program. For instance, a state may impose more stringent regulations for hazardous waste identification or identify state-specific hazardous waste. Therefore, we suggest that you contact your state hazardous waste agency to determine which regulations are applicable to your situation. If wastes are not listed or do not exhibit any hazardous waste characteristics, they are considered non-hazardous solid waste. Non-hazardous solid waste disposal and recycling is regulated on a state level. Therefore, you may wish to contact your state solid waste officials for more information on solid waste management. The most notable provisions of the RCRA statute are included in Subtitle C, which directs EPA to establish controls on the management of hazardous waste from their point of generation through their transportation and treatment, storage, and/or disposal. Because RCRA requires controls on hazardous waste generators, transporters, treatment, storage, and disposal facilities, the overall regulatory framework has become known as the cradle-to-grave system. The program exacts stringent record-keeping and reporting requirements on generators, transporters, and operators of treatment, storage, and disposal facilities handling hazardous waste. The Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, also known as Superfund, was enacted in 1980 to address the problem of remediating abandoned hazardous waste sites by establishing legal liability as well as a trust fund for cleanup activities. In general, CERCLA applies to contaminated sites, while RCRA's focus on controlling the ongoing generation and management of particular waste streams. RCRA, like CERCLA, has provisions to require cleanup of contaminated sites that occurred in the past. In 1984, Congress expanded the scope of RCRA with the enactment of hazardous and solid waste amendments. The amendments strengthened the law by covering small quantity generators of hazardous waste and establishing requirements for hazardous waste incinerators and the closing of substandard landfills. In 1986, RCRA addressed cleanup and leaking USTs and other leaking waste storage facilities. The amendments established a trust fund to pay for the cleanup of leaking UST sites where responsible parties cannot be identified. The Land Disposal Program Flexibility Act of 1976 allowed some flexibility in the procedures for land disposal of certain waste. For example, a waste is not subject to land disposal restrictions if it is sent to an industrial waste stream treatment facility, a municipal sewage treatment plant, or is treated in a zero discharge facility. The Bill Reducing Excessive Deadlines Obligation Act of 2013, which made it to the House floor in January 2014, would amend this law to remove a requirement that the administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency review and revise regulations declared under such act at least every 3 years. Treatment, storage, and disposal facilities manage hazardous waste under RCRA Subtitle C and generally must have a permit in order to operate. While most facilities have RCRA permits, some continue to operate under what is called interim status. Interim status requirements appear in 40 CFR Part 265. The permitting requirements for TSDFs appear in 40 CFR Parts 264 and 270. TSDFs manage hazardous waste in units that may include container storage areas, tanks, surface impoundments, waste piles, land treatment units, landfills, incinerators, containment buildings, and/or drip pads. The units specifying permitting and operational requirements are described in further detail in 40 CFR Part 264, subparts J through D.